In the next minutes, you'll see how a clean Illinois warehouse became the key to a coast-to-coast takedown. Hidden rooms revealed by concealed switches, mixers arranged for non-stop output, and encrypted phones that led agents from land to sea. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How does a spotless logistics hub hide a production plant big enough to feed multiple states? Start with a building that passes every drive-by test, stacked crates, clear walkways, labels that match agricultural and industrial supplies on paper, manifests lined up with entry logs, weight limits and shipping codes that mirror what inspectors expect to see when they skim a clipboard. The place read like a compliant distribution center. Routine visitors came and went, checking boxes and moving on. Nothing on the floor screamed risk. Everything was designed to be forgettable. Under that surface, the numbers were wrong. Routine log showed ordinary business hours, but the power meter told a different story. Sustained draws deep into the night, airflow pushing hard in zones that shouldn't need it if pallets were just sitting still. OSHA checklists looked fine, yet the ventilation kept surging, and the load curve never relaxed after closing time. It hinted at more than forklifts and shrink wrap. Inside, hidden switches behind trim panels unlocked sealed compartments. False floors lifted to reveal service corridors no one listed on plans. Backup generators sat wired for automatic transfer. Tested and ready. Separate water lines fed cleaning stations with quick disconnect sprayers, built to rinse equipment fast and keep cycles tight. Everything pointed to continuous uptime, a facility that could resume in minutes after an interruption and leave little residue when the hoses stopped. Industrial mixers sat paired with automated packaging lanes, not arranged for occasional runs, but for a steady tempo. Batch sizes matched a rhythm you'd expect from a plant, not a side hustle. Pallet wrappers, heat sealers, and labelers lined up so crews could move from mix to pack without downtime. This wasn't chaotic. It was tuned for repeatability and speed. They muted the noise. Acoustic treatment on interior rooms and reinforced walls cut the thump of motors during late-night cycles. Surveillance cameras covered every aisle and bay, but feeds funneled to remote dashboards rather than a guard shack. Operators could sit miles away and watch dock doors open and close, watch motion alerts clear, and keep the facade of an idle building, even while machines ran behind sealed doors. The timing told as much as the hardware. Dock schedules synced with regional trucking windows, especially those quiet periods when yard hustlers changed shifts and gate traffic dips. Trucks used private access routes that shielded movements from curious eyes on the street. Every step blended into freight rhythms, so nothing looked like a special event. Investigators followed the anomalies first. Utility data showed off-peak spikes that held steady like a production cycle. HVAC records revealed pressure differences in zones that should have been static. Delivery cadences drifted by a few hours on a rhythm that coincided with those energy plateaus. When they overlaid utility load curves with dock scans and badge swipes, the site lit up as an outlier. That cross-reference earned a warrant. On entry, walls gave way to concealed rooms, and sealed sections opened to machinery built for volume. The building gave up its secrets, but the command table pointed past the bricks, phones chirping in narrow windows, routes humming along clean bills, and money moving without noise beyond those walls. Why would a cartel keep perfect shipping documents and still carry multiple encrypted devices? Because the paper is for the front of house, and the phones run the back. When agents cracked open the command trailer, they didn't find chaos. They found tablets with fleet apps, route notes taped like shift briefs, and a stack of bills of lading that matched customs filings line for line. Every barcode scanned clean. Every port code matched the tariff book. On the same table sat phones with rotating IDs and messenger apps that wiped threads in seconds. That mix shouldn't exist if the operation is legitimate. Clean customs history paired with devices that hop identities suggests a split system. One track for auditors, one for operators. The physical side moved through carriers everyone trusts, with chassis swaps logged, drayage receipts filed, and rail handoffs on schedule. The digital side rode layered encryption, single-use group keys, and timed chat windows that vanished before a network tap could catch them. The goal was to leave behind neat records and no conversation. Follow the corporate shell, and the design gets clearer. Brokerages with offices in low-scrutiny jurisdictions stood between real shippers and front companies. Directors rotated every quarter, so no signature settled long enough to pull on. These entities handled vendor onboarding, insurance certificates, and port badges. On paper, they were logistics brokers. In practice, they were air gaps that kept names and money from touching. The timing underlined the discipline. Trucks rolled during gate lull periods when clerks changed stations and traffic dips. Departures landed inside 10-minute windows. so a single chassis could disappear into a crowd. Message windows on those phones were shorter. Instructions landed, confirmed, and evaporated. That denied capture and prevented anyone from getting a readable archive, even if a handset slipped. Cross-agency signals work bridged the gap between paper and phones. Subpoena-backed metadata pulled IMEIs into view. Device pings lined up with container IDs and specific chassis swaps. A handset that lit up outside a yard matched a container that cleared a gate, then reappeared on the same latitude as an inland rail stop. Content stayed dark. The pattern didn't. Analysts stitched people, accounts, and cargo routes into a graph that showed the flow from Asian factories and Mexican transshipment nodes through U.S. ports to railheads feeding the Midwest. The tablets added texture once agents got past lock screens. Driver rosters, cost trackers, and maintenance notes showed a business that hired specialists and guarded margins. Fleet performance metrics sat next to fuel tax reports. Nothing screamed contraband. Everything signaled a company tuned for endurance, able to shift crews, reroute loads, and keep KP as green under pressure. That is the trick. The phones didn't expose product, they exposed process. The cadence of calls, the repeat of chassis numbers, the predictable handoffs all created a drumbeat. Illicit goods moved inside that beat under clean cover, shielded by bills that sailed through audits and by carriers too normal to flag. Once the cadence was mapped, the vulnerability was obvious. You don't swing at the trucks first. You freeze the wallet that feeds them, and you do it before the next gate opens. What happens when the money stops before the trucks stop? You get a network still moving on muscle memory, while its accounts are turning to stone. That's why the first wave didn't kick doors. It signed orders. Coordinated freezes hit payroll processors, vendor accounts, and escrow balances while courier teams stepped off to grab the hand-to-hand transfers. It all landed before internal alerts could ripple through group chats. The point was simple. Deny the cash that keeps lights on, engines running, and landlords patient. Drug seizures make headlines. Empty accounts end operations. Organizations can shrug off a lost pallet by shifting inventory and tightening margins. They can't shrug off fuel cards that fail at the pump, or a landlord who disables dock access because rent bounced. The strategy recognized that daily bills are the hinge. Pop that hinge, and the big doors don't open. Agents map the choke points first. Payroll processors linked to shell firms with rotating managers, vendor prepayments, staging deposits for packaging and cleaning supplies, freight insurance premiums queued for renewal. The certificates needed to get release codes, equipment leases tied to forklifts, reefers, and yard tractors, all routed through entities that looked ordinary until the money froze. Each point was a valve. Close enough valves, and pressure drops across the whole line. Timing made it bite. Batch ACH holds sat in the queue, set to catch files after bank hours. Wire recalls fired while back office staff were off the clock, leaving no one to reroute funds in flight. Couriers felt it in real time, a pickup that should have cleared stalled mid-block. By the time a handler called for help, the receiving account had a hold, and the overflow account had a flag. The fallout was fast. Paid for loads stranded because release fees couldn't clear. Drivers quit on the spot when fuel cards declined twice, knowing tow yards charge by the hour. Warehouse access lapsed as rent payments failed, gate codes expired, and badge lists stopped updating. Insurance portals locked out renewals, which meant containers couldn't be released from terminals without fresh certificates. The network still had product in trucks. It no longer had permission to move. Pressure-based containment worked because it took away reaction time. Rather than chase one flashy stockpile, the action targeted the boring flows that repeat every week. Those flows carry certainty. Cut them, and every routine becomes a question. Who's paying Friday? Which card works? Where's the insurance binder? While they searched for answers, the clock kept ticking. Investigators watched it unfold on finance dashboards, tuned to bank APIs and processor alerts. Attempted withdrawals tripped rules, exposing secondary accounts and dark corner credit lines. Each flag triggered a follow-on hold, a chain of locks closing before anyone could pivot to cash pickups or crypto off-ramps. The graph of accounts thinned, then stalled. That's the payoff. Targeting financial flows degraded operations faster and longer than seizing a single shipment ever could. With the cash constricted, the network turned to its only remaining lifeline, the supply chain that kept the mixers fed and the lines stocked. Next stop was the water, where labels, drums, and solvents carry the future volume. Why crack open containers looking for labels and drums instead of finished product? Because input kills output. At sea, teams slowed vessels under legal authority, logged engine reductions, and opened holds with terminal inspectors on standby. Containers rolled to checks where seal numbers Reefer set points and manifest lines met a second set of eyes. The target wasn't bricks on deck. It was the upstream pieces that turn a quiet warehouse into a loud plant. The actions were methodical. Boarding teams verified crew lists and cargo plans, then walked stacks with handheld readers to confirm seal integrity before cranes shifted boxes to inspection lanes. Containers flagged by routing or timing went straight to non-intrusive imaging, then to full opens. Pallets at the top told one story: plastics, solvents, lab gear, while the bottom layers carried the real leverage: mixers in knockdown crates and packaging supplies coded as industrial components. Headlines chase finished narcotics. Long-term damage comes from pulling the teeth out of production. Audits began on paper. Bill of lading data got a scrub for HS codes, shipper histories, and transshipment paths that didn't match normal trade lanes. Risk models lit up codes linked to chemical precursors and process equipment that, on their own, looked boring. Teams checked ship-to-ship transfers recorded between waypoints and matched fuel logs to see if a vessel stopped where the AIS track claimed. The point was to find the feedstock, what factories need before they can run a Monday to Friday cycle. Seizing label rolls sounds small. It isn't. Without the exact SKU labels and blister pack formats, distribution slows to a crawl and error rates rise. Industrial solvents matter more. They define throughput, purity, and cycle time. Pull those and a plant doesn't just pause. It loses weeks retracing sources and redesigning workflows. Mixers and dosing pumps add another layer. Without replacement parts and calibration kits, output drifts out of spec, and downstream buyers start refusing lots. Inspections at multiple ports produce the link back to the Midwest node. Boxes misdeclared as printing supplies carried label stock with the same dimensions and adhesives found in the Illinois racks. Crates manifested as food-grade mixers matched the bolt patterns and motor specs seen in the seized maintenance manuals. Intermediate goods, stabilizers, binders, blister foils showed the same supplier codes that lined up with the warehouse's reorder notes. Each find tightened the circle around the production hub. The reach extended beyond domestic terminals. Foreign customs and port state control partners flagged similar consignments at transshipment ports in Asia and Mexico. Shared risk scores and watch lists pushed their inspectors to pop the same codes and shippers. That international pass-down closed the easy detours, forcing the network to face delays, fees, and rebooking at every turn, with replacement orders no longer moving under the radar. Timing locked it in. Maritime slowdowns hit while bank holds and fuel card failures rolled across land. That denied the fallback move where operators rushed to divert containers or arrange emergency buys. With ships idling outside breakwaters and boxes in secondary inspection, the pipeline lost its prime. Targeting production materials cut future volume at the source, shrinking the pipeline before it formed. With supply throttled and cash frozen, the final move hit leadership in comms at dawn. How do you arrest hundreds without sparks flying across a nationwide network? You set the clock before anyone wakes up and move as one. The first entries hit at 4:20 a.m., not because it sounds precise, but because the timeline of shift changes, home routines, and overnight freight favors that minute. Teams rolled on quiet streets and dark warehouses at the same time, turning idle addresses into controlled scenes in minutes. The doctrine was nonviolent pressure. Staged actions, synchronized entries, calm procedures, no racing for doors, no loud heroics. Each team knew its script and the order of rooms. Commands stayed short. Movements stayed measured. The aim was control, not shock. When dozens of sites crack open in the same window, suspects lose the instinct to warn others because they do not yet know they need to. Push too hard, and you trigger panic. People smash phones, torch ledgers, or bolt out back doors. Move too slow, and word leaks from one zip code to the next. The plan split that gap. Entry waves landed in tight bands, separated by minutes. Real-time map updates tied it together. Shared dashboards marked teams, targets, and status pins that flipped from red to green as rooms cleared. A garage on one coast, a storage room in the Midwest, an office above a yard. Each hit followed a clock that updated for everyone in the stack. If a door stalled, another team shifted forward to preserve timing. The map was the metronome. The goal wasn't spectacle. It was denial of reaction time. No alarms, no chain texts, no last-minute wipes. Device custody happened fast. Phones went straight into airplane mode to cut remote access. Laptops closed, powered, and bagged. On-site document triage sorted what traveled and what got imaged on the spot. A receipt book here, a fuel card ledger there, a spare tablet with driver notes, small pieces that only matter when linked to the national case file. The perimeter moved in step with the entries, yards sealed before dawn, trucks held with drivers accounted for and bills photographed, vessels flagged for inspection at the same hour. With land and sea locked at once, the network had nowhere to vent pressure, no last run, no emergency burn of evidence. Every valve closed at the same turn of the handle. Cross-jurisdictional warrants solved the paperwork race. Standardized entry playbooks kept outcomes steady across city lines and agency patches. Door positions, call-outs, evidence tags, custody forms, identical from house to house. Repeatable actions reduce risk and remove guesswork, which is where mistakes and resistance grow. The payoff of nonviolent pressure is simple. Command and control vanish before anyone understands why calls aren't going through. Leaders reached for phones that were already dark. Dispatchers refreshed screens that no longer updated. By dawn, the numbers read like a balance sheet in freefall. Sites cleared, devices in custody, and decision-makers sitting in quiet rooms while the system they relied on stopped answering. Why do 600-plus arrests matter more as a systems failure than a headline number? Because that count, spread across roles and regions, signaled that the enterprise didn't just lose people, it lost its operating model. The surge tally reached from the top down, leadership seated at procurement tables, logistics coordinators who set dock times, finance handlers who moved payroll and insurance, drivers tied to chassis numbers, and warehouse operators who ran batch cycles. Each detention removed a function, not just a face, and the clock that kept everything moving no longer kept time. The evidence didn't fragment when people did. Device seizures brought encrypted phones, tablets with fleet apps, and laptops loaded with maintenance logs. Document grabs filled in the rest. Contracts, insurance binders, badge lists, and ACH templates. Combined, they formed an evidentiary mesh that didn't depend on any one testimony. If a memory went thin, a timestamp, a ping, or a ledger line carried the link. That's how enterprise cases stay intact when individual stories bend. Cross-matching ledger exports with shipping records exposed the money's actual routes. Wage pipelines showed who got hazard premiums on late-night cycles. Vendor contracts revealed prepayment schemes that fronted packaging and cleaning supplies to specific addresses. Kickback paths surfaced in round numbers that landed one day after container releases. When those entries lined up with gate scans and rail interchanges, the paper trail read like a route guide. The organization ran like a mid-sized company. Shift rosters posted by week, quarterly targets tied to throughput, compliance playbooks that told crews how to pass audits and when to shut doors. After the arrests, those manuals still sat on shelves, but the executives who owned them and the operating capital that funded them were gone. A plan without signers is just a binder. So the result read less like a raid count and more like a receivership forced overnight. Operations halted under custody and cash constraints, not under a single dramatic seizure. The lesson holds. Treat narcotics trafficking as a supply chain and data problem, and you starve its ability to reassemble the same routes under new names. Cartel logistics fracture fastest when money streams, production tools, and predictable routines collapse together. Cut the cash, seize the inputs, scramble the schedule, and the machine stops answering. Now do your part. Watch supply chains with the same intensity as street corners. Support beneficial ownership transparency, so shell firms can't hide who controls them. Push ports, brokers, and registries to verify owners and flag changes fast. If this system returns, it will ride paperwork and quiet routes. Keep pressure on the map, utility data, dock times, vendor lists, so patterns can't settle. Stay focused on the infrastructure, not the bricks, and the next network runs out of road.